Learning Objectives. After completing this module, learners will be able to know about the importance of environmental issues in world politics, understand how the inequalities between the global North and South lead to differentiated responsibilities, identify the role played by India regarding environmental issue at global stage, find out geopolitics resource and issues of indigenous people. Environmental concerns in global politics. The world is facing ecological and environmental problems in the form of loss of soil fertility, degradation of water resources, loss of natural forests and biodiversity, the decline in the ozone layer, coastal pollution, etc. These problems cannot be solved by any one country. A collective effort by all the countries of the world is needed. Thus, environmental concerns are part of world politics. Essentially, it raises the questions of who is responsible for pollution, how to pay the price for pollution, how to allocate the natural resources of the world, and many more. It is only since 1960s the impact of environmental issues on economic growth has acquired prominence. Organizations like the Club of Rome, United Nations Environment Programme, UNEP, etc., by debating and discussing environmental issues, made it a part of global politics. The consolidation of environmental issues in the global arena took place in 1992 at United Nations Conference on Environment and Development held in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Also called Earth Summit, it witnessed the participation of 170 countries and many NGOs of the world. The Rio Summit led to the forming of conventions on forestry, climate change and biodiversity. Also, it brought out Agenda 21, a list of recommendations on development practices. There was a broad consensus on the economic development with ecological responsibility. This is known as sustainable development. But this raised the question of how exactly sustainable development has to be achieved. The protection of global commons. Any resource that is shared by a community rather than owned by one are known as commons. At the world stage, there are some areas that fall outside the jurisdiction of any sovereign nation. They need common governance of the global community. These areas include the atmosphere of the Earth, world's ocean floors, outer space, and Antarctica. With much struggle, many agreements to protect the global commons has been reached. Some to them are Antarctic Treaty of 1959, the 1987 Montreal Protocol, and the 1991 Antarctic Environmental Protocol. But there are disparities in maintaining the global commons due to North-South inequalities, common but differentiated responsibilities. For the global North, the issue of environment conservation should be the equal responsibility for all the countries. But countries of the South blame the industrial development of the past century by the North for the current environmental scenario. Thus, they want to be treated specially in terms of considering their developmental needs, interpretation of international rules, and application of environmental laws on them. This was accepted as the common but differentiated responsibilities at the Rio Declaration of 1992. The acceptance of this principle led to the exemption of countries like India, China, and other developing nations from the requirements of Kyoto Protocol, an international agreement to reduce emissions that warms the earth. Common property resources. These are the common property of a group, members of which have rights and duties in utilizing, maintaining, and protecting the resources. For example, the sacred groves of South India. Such common properties are dwindling owing to population pressures, agricultural intensification, degradation of ecosystems, etc. Environmental movements, one or many. The significant challenge to environmental degradation came not from the governments, but from groups of volunteers who are environmentally conscious. Most of them work at the local level, with some playing a role at the international level. Environmental movements by these groups are the most vibrant social movements in the globe. They led to the formation of new ideas and long-term visions in tackling environmental issues in both individual and collective capacities. Forest movements in countries like Mexico, India, Indonesia, Chile, Brazil, etc. The economic pressures in these countries led to the destruction of large tracts of forest lands. The forest movements by the environmental groups led to increasing forest cover now. Liberalization policies of the Global South are leading to opening up of mineral resources to exploitation by MNCs. They plunder the resources, pollute the waterways, displace the communities, and destroy ecosystems. One example of fighting such an MNC took place in the Philippines when a vast network of groups organized against Western Mining Corporation or WMC of Australia. Another movement is the struggle against mega dams. One can find an environmental movement in every country where a mega dam is being constructed. These are essentially pro-river movements that want to use and maintain river resources sustainably. In India, the most important anti-dam movement was the Narmada Bachao Andolan. The environmental movements in India are essentially non-violent in nature. The indigenous people and their rights. Environment, resources, and politics together are the problems of indigenous people. As per the United Nations, indigenous people are the original inhabitants of a country before the arrival of people with different culture. Today they are living accustomed to their own economic, social, and cultural practices unperturbed by the institutions of a nation. In the context of global politics, indigenous peoples of various countries are beginning to voice their struggles, concerns, and are demanding their rights. They want the world community to treat them as equals. Indigenous people are found in regions like Africa, Central and South Americas, India, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific Island nations that were inhabited by Melanesian, Polynesian, and Micronesian people for many centuries. When a land is lost and the economic source is lost to these people, then how can they enjoy political autonomy when their physical survival is at stake? The scheduled tribes of India are the indigenous people. They constitute 8% of the population and mostly depend on the cultivation of land for their subsistence. Since the advent of British colonial rule, their lands were subjected to outside pressures. Till then, they enjoyed free and continuous access. After independence, they are provided with constitutional protection of their political rights, but nothing much has changed their fate. Indigenous people were neglected in both domestic and international politics for a long time. It is in the 70s the indigenous peoples' movements began. In 1975, many NGOs fighting for their cause attained consultative status at the UN. Summary. Let us summarize what we have learned. The environmental issues of the world are part of global politics. The consolidation of environmental issues in the global arena took place in 1992 at United Nations Conference on Environment and Development held in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. A demand for sustainable development was accepted at the Rio Earth Summit. Protection of global common resources, common but differentiated responsibilities, and community properties are part of environmental issues at the global stage. India's strategy in negotiating environmental issues dependent on the historical emissions of greenhouse gases by developed nations, which called for common but differentiated responsibilities. India and other developing nations wanted room for them to improve their socio-economic conditions while having fewer restrictions on emissions targets. Environmental movements by volunteer groups set the agenda for negotiations on environmental issues in the global arena. Resource geopolitics is another aspect of environment-based issue in world politics. The issues of indigenous people revolve around environment, resources, and politics.